The performing arts, the entertainment industry, show business. Whatever you choose to call it, to me, it seems like a rather strange way to spend a finite amount of time that we call life. I mean, think about it. All the stress and nerves and anxiety of trying to get that dream role or job. An artist will hear the word no so many more times than the word yes. Sometimes it really takes its toll on your emotional, mental, and physical health. But so many of us want to do this. Many of us already are, and I need to know why. Hi, I'm Amy Coots, and I'm an actor, hypnotherapist, and the founder of Acting with Courage Hypnotherapy. And in this series, I will be interviewing some fantastic actors, writers, directors, producers, anyone involved in the creative arts. And I will be asking them how and why they got into their respective careers and the advice that they offer to other creatives to look after their mental health and well-being. Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining me again. So my lovely guest today is joining me all the way from Melbourne, Australia. She's a very talented actor, Sekhem healer, teacher, kinesiologist, director of Impulse Company Australia, which is a company that teaches actors Meisner Technique. Hello, Erica Chestnut. How are you?
Hello. Hi, Amy. Good. Nice to be talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for your time. I understand you're also a tired mama of a young baby boy, so I appreciate your time.
No worries. It's nice I'll try and be as coherent as I can.
Excellent. So Erica, why do you teach acting?
That's an excellent question. I'll give you my life story succinctly. I have always learnt something and then ended up teaching it. When I was young, I did a lot of dancing and then ended up teaching when I was around 16, 17 through to my early 20s. I was teaching dance. And then once I was at drama school and I finished there at university, and then I got into circus and I did circus for a really long time, and I ended up teaching that for almost 16 years. And then I never thought I would be an acting teacher because I have always thought I could never teach that because I don't know enough about being an actor. Yeah, funny how we say these things to ourselves.
So I did. You say that because I felt that way when I finished my drama degree to be a high school drama teacher. I was like, I'm not ready to teach these kids. I need to learn how to act better myself. So I totally get you on that.
Yeah, and it just I moved to London a long time ago now, almost 10 years ago, 2007. Longer. How long was that? I can't do maths. I have a baby. I can't do maths. With the view to never being an actor ever again, because I'd sort of had enough. I'd spent 7 or 8 years in Melbourne after finishing my degree. I was like, I think I'm done with that. Let's just go and do something else. And I didn't know what the other thing would be. And I naively thought I would get to London and not care a fig about being an actor. And I was sorely mistaken. And every time I went on the tube and looked at all the posters, I would just be depressed because I was like, I'm supposed to be doing that and I'm not doing it. And somehow the path led me to the Actors Centre and led me to a 5-day course that I did with Scott Williams at the Impulse Company. And that was the key for me. That was everything unlocked there when I suddenly went, that's why so many things at drama school didn't make sense, or my process and my approach didn't make sense. And all of a sudden I was like, this is what I do. I just didn't know that it had a name or a way to be taught. So I then spent the next 3 or 4 years in London working with a beautiful theatre company and training with the Impulse Company and doing lots of work, and got to the end of that and then felt the pull to come home back to Australia. So and that's when I started to realize I was like, I'm going to end up teaching. That's what's going to happen in there. So, and along that road as well, I also began my kinesiology study and began my life coaching study. That was all happening in the background. And once I decided to move back to Melbourne, I spoke to Scott and the Impulse Company in London and said that I wanted to teach his approach to the work. And 5 years later, here I am. Ta-da!
That's
Teaching.
fantastic. And I know I and your little IC group that I used to be a part of very much.
Yay!
Are all grateful for it, because it really is. I mean, this probably sounds over dramatic, but it's
Heaven
not just.
forbid.
Yeah, oh, heaven forbid actors would be over dramatic. But
Can't help it.
No, but not only does it change the way in which you work as an actor, which it has for me dramatically, it's life-changing too. And I think and we'll talk about the technique in a minute, but I'm so grateful to you and to Scott and, to the approach that you teach. And I hope anyone watching really considers going and giving it a go, because bit of a plug for Erica there, but no, honestly, like it's why don't you tell us a little more about what Meisner Technique is and how it helps actors?
Oh golly. Okay, well it's a technique that was developed by Sanford Meisner, who was an originating member of the group theatre back in the 1930s. And once the group theatre separated and Lee Strasberg went one way and Sanford Meisner went another way and Stella Adler went another way. And he went with the idea that what happens to you doesn't depend on you. It depends on the other actor, and developed a series of really specific exercises that train you to get out of your own head and put all of your attention on the other person, so that you sit in response to them rather than making decision or having ideas or being creative, dare I say it. And it's specific, it's repeatable, it works every time. And that's what I liked about it. I'm a technician. I like being able to teach that there's steps that you can do every single time to get you somewhere. And that's why it appealed to me. So that's why I love teaching it, because it works every time.
Yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal. It's a weird kind of magic. And I have to say, I mean, we'll talk about your work with kinesiology and life coaching in just a moment. And I'm also a hypnotherapist. I think there's an interesting correlation there between that idea of putting the attention on the other person. Again, from a mental health point of view, it does take a lot of the anxiety and the stress of having to be, look at me, I'm exciting or interesting. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not, I will remain polite in this conversation, but I'm not a big fan of any kind of method-related acting technique that requires you to draw on personal experience or your inner world or manipulate your internal world to get you somewhere in terms of your acting. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's useful. And the simple way that our brains work means that over time, that thing that you are thinking about will lessen every time that you go to use it. So eventually you end up needing to go further and a little bit darker and think of something else that's a little bit more awful, and you end up cannibalizing your own life to try and reach a result internally. I don't think that's a great, healthy way to work.
Which is very interesting you say that too, because coming back to my work, I had to really kind of look at my two worlds of hypnotherapy and acting. And it's interesting you say that, because the root of the technique that I use, which is rapid transformational therapy, which is Marissa Peer's version of hypnotherapy, is for you to resolve those past hurts and past issues. So, but what you've just said then is, if you say you have this memory or this issue in your past that you go back to, if you're using a different acting technique that requires that, if you resolve that and that has no meaning or no power, it's not going to help you. And that's what we do in hypnosis, is that we get the person to change the way they view that situation and resolve it. And that's why that probably will end up failing you in the end, which I had to kind of look at that and go, oh, how interesting that those two kind of correlate, you know?
Yeah, it always just makes me think of the scene in The Labyrinth when she finally remembers that the line that she needs to say to the Goblin King, which is, "You have no power over me." And then he disappears and he turns into the owl and off he goes, and that's it. And
Yeah.
she escapes out of the labyrinth, and it's, once they have no power, you can't use them. So
Exactly.
you're going to run out of ideas.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I think that's why this technique is so fantastic, is because, I think I used to get afraid of going, oh, if I don't hold on to that thing anymore, I can't get like tears or whatever. But it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. The well never runs dry. I wish it did sometimes, but it just doesn't. Like, there's going to be plenty of things that are going to upset you, or moments or things that you say in the moment that, and look, I think I was so excited recently because I really feel like the show that I did recently was the first time since training with you back in Melbourne that I really felt like Meisner Technique like really happened. Like, I really feel like, because honestly, I had moments in that show where I think it's probably one of the few shows I've done where I wasn't trying to push for anything. It was just happening. I was like, my Meisner training, this is all come out. Like, there'd be moments I would say a line and suddenly because I'd be looking at that other person, and then suddenly I wasn't pushing for tears necessarily, or I wasn't pushing for an emotional state. It was just coming. But that's possibly also the acting with passion work I've done with you as well. It's a whole other conversation. But
also just give yourself credit for allowing yourself to be in the flow. And I think it doesn't matter what technique you use, really. If you're in flow, then the truth will come. One would hope.
Yeah.
I'm an advocate for truth. That's what I want to see on stage. It's what I want to see in my life. It's what I want to see in people's lives. It's
Yeah, which is basically, that was my mantra, and I was also sort of thinking about that as we were working on this. And a friend of mine said to me, well, are you happy with the show? Do you think it was a success? And the way I defined success was, I asked myself the question, do I think that I told the truth? And I could say, yes, I think that I told the truth. And that for me is a success, because that's now where I think when I do the show, I'm kind of not like, oh, I hope they like it, or I hope we get a good review. I sort of don't care about that anymore. And it was like, do I think I told the truth and I was truthful? Yeah. And I think that's success. If you can say, every moment was truthful and I was in it, and not worrying about necessarily whether the audience was liking it or not. And I love that the classes try to get that out of you, is just always be dealing with the truth, and then acknowledging when the truth wasn't there, or if you were trying to invent something, or
the bullshit meter that starts to go.
Yes, exactly.
The ticker starts to move up. Yeah,
exactly. Getting goosebumps just talking about it. It's actually very interesting. Going back to what you were saying about going to London, I find that interesting. You were saying that you went to London to get away from acting, which usually it's the opposite for most people. They go to London for that reason. You said you didn't really know, other than acting, what you would do. Do you ever get moments like that now where you still think, do I really want to be doing this?
No, not really. I often ask myself, am I doing, is this the thing I want to be doing? Am I, is there something else? Did I miss the memo? Is there some other job that I'm supposed to be doing that I'm not doing? And then I always come back to, there's nothing else that I want to be doing. Whenever I'm feeling frustrated or whatever's happening in the industry or what's happening in my immediate world, I always just remind myself there's actually nothing else I want to be doing. And I'm doing all of the things I want to be doing. So I'm lucky. And then that makes everything easier.
I've talked to a few people about this, and they've said that, I've tried to quit and do something else, but I couldn't get another job, or something came up. And it's interesting what you say about those posters you see in the tube coming up the escalator. And it's so true. Like, you look at them all and you go, and if it's in your heart and it's in your soul, you'll feel a bit of that ache, which tells you basically that you should be doing that in some capacity. Yeah. What do you find most challenging about life in the performing arts?
I think the thing that they don't teach you in any school anywhere, and in any drama school, is tenacity.
Yeah.
And it's a trait that not everybody has. I believe it can be learned.
Yes.
But I think sometimes when the tenacity starts to drop, that's when things can be a bit difficult. There's so many things about our industry that are already really hard. It is difficult to get work. No one becomes an actor because they love learning lines. That's not a thing. No one does that.
No, not really.
And then some people naturally know that they want to perform, but then struggle with the business side of, it's called show business. It's not called show muck around. It's not called show turn up a little bit if you feel like it.
Yes, true.
So there's so many other elements that could make the industry difficult. So I think when you turn up and get to do the thing that you do, the actor's work, that should be enjoyable. So the difficult part is when that tenacity starts to drop away and it gets hard. You feel like you're climbing up a hill that you can't ever get to the top of. I think that's when it can become hard.
So then so when that does happen, that tenacity drops and it's, you're like, am I ever going to get to the top of the mountain? What are your suggestions for people to kind of keep them going or to kind of build that tenacity?
There's a little blue fish in a little movie that I love who just says, just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. And
beautiful.
Sometimes focusing on the very end result is too big a jump for where you are at that moment in time. So rather than focusing on dare I use a Neighbours analogy, being Australian and every actor is only a real actor if they've worked on Neighbours before. If Neighbours is your
pinnacle, clearly failed. We failed.
clearly, not even close. Not even close. Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. If that's your pinnacle and that yet you don't feel like you're anywhere near being able to get there, then focusing up there that jump is too wide. So start with the little step, which is maybe that's practicing your self-tape. Maybe it's finding scenes and just working in front of a camera. But yeah, having the end goal is really useful, but depending on where your consciousness is at, you can decide whether that jump can be too far. I've said that about 5 times. Clearly that's what I mean.
Well, yeah. I mean, sometimes they say it takes 7 times to really touch someone and to get them to go, all right, I get it now. And you got to repetition, getting things into your subconscious. That's how we learn lines. That's how we change our brain neuroplasticity in hypnotherapy and other therapies. So repetition is totally fine with me. And another thing you could do is go to Impulse Company classes and do some scenes with some awesome people. Because, I mean, honestly, I know I'm doing some shameless plugging for you. You're welcome. But honestly, that was a game changer for me. And I kind of wish, I tend not to regret things, but I'd kind of wished I'd come across you much earlier because I think it really would have changed a lot of things early on. So, I'm grateful for the work that you're doing and the little community that you formed. No, honestly, it's true. I mean, it's not lip service. I pay respect to things that I think are so very valuable and useful to people. So you still work quite a bit with Scott Williams and he comes out annually to help with workshops as well. Could you tell actors who might be considering either this year or next year, are curious about his work, what they would get? How would they benefit from doing either work with you or work with Scott?
Ultimately, this, whatever path you are led to, whatever calls you is right for you at the time that it arrives. So, we'll never know what might have happened if you had have done the work 8-9 years ago. We'll never know.
True.
But it came at a time when it was right for you. I really believe that for everybody. And, it's not for everybody. But people will be called to it, same way that I ended up feeling pulled towards it. But I knew nothing about it. Scott just remains a really kind, knowledgeable, deeply passionate teacher. And something happens when he's one of those teachers that you get in the room with them and you feel better just for being in the room
for sure
with him. The positivity that he exudes is remarkable. And the thing that I always love about his work and the work that we teach is that it's instantly usable. It's not a scene study workshop or a get directed by workshop. He teaches technique. I'm a technician. I like I like that. So, and it's always, everyone starts from the same platform when they start learning the work, whether they're
which is what's great about it too.
Yeah. So, you know, whether you've been working in the industry for the last 30 years or whether you're relatively green and are just sort of discovering what this whole acting caper is all about, everyone starts from the same point. We always end up with a huge variety of people in the classes and in Scott's workshops as well, just because it is unlike anything else, really.
Yeah. And it's very humbling too. It's very humbling, and for someone to come in and say, oh, I've got X years of experience or whatever, to then come in and go, right, I'm going to start from ground level and see what happens, and to watch people. And it's not, I mean, being in a class situation, you don't feel like you're looking at some, you know, two people going, oh, they're a strong actor and they're a bit not as strong. It never feels like that. It's just because it's just two human beings interacting and bouncing off one another, and it's exhilarating. And none of that, you're right, none of that stuff really matters, because you're just witness to what's happening in front of you, you know, between two people, whether they're super experienced or not. And it's always exciting no matter who you're watching, you know.
And I think a large reason for that, and the way that the Impulse Company works, there's plenty of people out there that teach the Meisner Technique.
Absolutely.
Across the world, everywhere.
Yeah.
And Scott does teach it differently.
Yeah.
A lot of his work is, we have a classroom that's just has no judgment. It's the authenticity, I think, that comes through the work that is also built up in a room where there is no judgment. And that's specifically, the technique is specifically taught to avoid judgment. That's sort of what helps it be so transformational. You know, art imitates life, life imitates art. We've all been in a show at some point where it weirdly starts to echo something else that's happening in our life, and these parallels start to happen.
Very much.
You know?
Oh yeah.
Those lines get to do all sorts of crazy blurred things when we're working, and you know, this work is no different. You can't learn to be truthful without it affecting and being connected to your emotional truth. You can't learn a way to do that without it not infiltrate your civilian life.
Well, yeah, which is exactly what I said before. And I think, the work has changed me as an actor and how I approach it and how I am in life as well, in the best possible way. And it's very interesting what you said before about Meisner being taught all around the world, as it is, by different teachers. But I think the key thing to think about there is that whether it's Meisner or any other acting technique, I'm sure a lot of actors could possibly tell you that they have had, unfortunately, a not so positive experience with teachers and classes in the past. I know I've got that story, and I know other people, even in your little tribe, that have had that experience too, even some to the point where they don't want to go near acting ever again. But what's really beautiful about what you and Scott offer, he offers it in London, you offer it in Oz, is that it is a kind environment where no one feels judged and people feel supported, and everyone kind of thrives and their work just gets better. And I think that's so very important, again, because it is a tough gig, and you're putting yourself out there, and it's vulnerable to have people that support you and good teachers that are in it because they simply love teaching and they love what they're teaching, and not just because it didn't work out for them. You know, I think that's just so important, again, because that has an effect on the people that you're teaching and their love and their experience of performing arts. So it's so necessary to have people who offer a room of kindness, you know.
Yeah, well, thank you, Amy. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the work fundamentally changed me as a person and an actor, and that's why I wanted to teach it, because I think if I can just help one more person get to the root of how they tick through a class, and that makes their life better, then that...
Marissa Peer, who I mentioned before, she talks about if you are able to help someone breathe easier on the planet, then your life has meaning. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because whether it is through an acting class, which ultimately people are using because they then want to get work, it's so much more than that, because it does give the joy back to someone who lost the joy because they had a bad experience, or they just weren't really feeling supported or whatever it might be. So it does offer that in terms, it's quite holistic in that sense as well, even though it's not a therapy, so to speak. It does kind of have that byproduct, I guess.
Yes, it's not therapy, but it can have a cathartic effect.
For sure. And it's interesting when you try to explain an impulse class. He's not an actor.
Yeah, I always just say to everyone that comes to class, mate, you can't talk about this outside of class because people will just look at you like you're nuts.
Yeah, exactly. And it's more of a case of, look, why don't you go along, have a look at it, and then you might understand, because talking about it doesn't make, you just end up being like a mess. And then they look at you going, is this some kind of cult? What is
drinking that Kool-Aid? Yeah.
Just a couple more questions before we go, because I know that you're very tired. You've got a lot on your plate. Motherhood, babies.
Baby's asleep, it's fine. Yeah.
Do you ever have any, so I know that you still are acting as well, and you do quite a few projects aside from your teaching. Do you ever have any, I mean, we sort of talked about, have you ever considered doing anything else, the challenges? I'm curious if you ever get any negative self-talk as an actor, and what is it? And if so, like, how do you shut that down?
I don't think as humans we can ever get rid of that negative Nancy voice in our head, that the inner critic. But it is how you deal with it and whether you let that affect you or not as to how much that has power over you. You have no power over me. And for me personally, a lot of that negative self-talk stuff was dealt with through when I was training to be a life coach, and you probably had a lot of it when you were learning the hypno in the early days as well.
Absolutely.
I always found, and everyone's different, everyone has their own way of dealing with their inner critic or their negative Nancy, that likes to give you a hard time and tell you all how you're rubbish and what are you even doing anymore? All of those voices that we all hear. And that's interesting. I've just had a thought pop into my head, which was from Byron Katie, which is a podcast that I listened to ages ago.
I hear she's amazing. Yeah,
definitely worth listening to.
And
it's just popped into my head, so obviously I'm gonna have to talk about that.
Absolutely.
Which is when that stuff happens, when you start to get that negative talk or it arrives in you, the first thing you need to ask yourself, is it true? And is it really true? Because quite often it's not really true. It's a story that we're telling ourselves, and then you go, well, where is that story coming from? Well, everyone tells me that I haven't been on Neighbours, because that's my pinnacle point. So I'm obviously not really an actor because I haven't been on Neighbours. That's a crude example, but most Australian actors will sympathise with me in some way.
Or if I can also add to that, yes, it's the Neighbours thing, but it's also the minute you tell someone, what have I seen you in? Probably nothing.
Yeah. I've worked for 20 years, but you probably haven't seen me in anything.
Probably not.
Yeah. Probably not.
Yeah.
So I think the easy way to deal with it is to go, I hear you in there saying all of that, and I will deal with you later. I'll talk to you later. And then when I do talk to it later, I'll often just go, now, is that true? Is it really true? And then quite often the answer is no. Anyway, so then it stops. I go, well, it's not true. So it takes all the power out of it. And then there's not so much to worry about. So
it just hearing you say that just reminded me of when I did the workshop with Scott 2 years ago, and he talked about that thing as well of the inner critic and thinking about, not denying that it's there, but just putting it, like you said, putting it aside and dealing with it later. But also he talks about it like a 5-year-old child, or he has before, I remember. And would you talk to a tiny child the way that you talk to yourself? Or actually, he said conversely, would you allow a 5-year-old child to talk to you that way? And the answer is probably no. I mean, you wouldn't stand for that. And again, you being a mum, I'm sure that you wouldn't stand for Leo, being talked to like that, right? And if and him talking about himself like that,
Yeah, absolutely.
probably wouldn't be acceptable.
It's not an uncommon notion that the way we talk to ourselves is way crueler than the way we would ever talk to our friends.
Before we wrap up, I just had one final question to ask you. What advice would you most like to give to other actors out there, whether they're out of drama school or confused about the direction they're going in, their health and well-being, or even just navigating their career? What would be your sage advice?
Oh my goodness.
Big question.
I suppose two things come to mind. One thing that's always, and I can't take credit for it, Eleanor Roosevelt said it, which is no one can make you feel anything unless you let them, which is just a nice thing to carry around with you. But also, I think even when I talk to young actors now, I suppose the thing I say most is just keep going. Just keep going. Yeah, just keep swimming. If it's the thing that you wake up and think about, and it's the thing that you lie awake at night and think about, then there's a reason for that. So just keep swimming.
And I think that is the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, Erica. I really appreciate your time. And thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for watching this. And if you'd like to see more videos in this series, please remember to subscribe to Why This.